Up next, we have a very special guest. He is the CEO of the Cardano Foundation. So let's go ahead and give a warm welcome to Frederik Gregaard.
It's also a place where the regulators, they have time. They pay attention to what you're doing. So in many ways, I think about it a little bit like Cardano being the spaceman on this rocket. We are moving faster and further than anybody out there, but it's also a place where it's very easy to, misstep or take a fall. I actually asked an AI to create this image. So I didn't really know how it turned out, but it's pretty nice. Now, we have some opportunities, and I always speak a lot about enterprises, and don't be scared about enterprises. What I mean about an enterprise is really that we live in a world where when your project grows, and you get more than 10 employees, and you get a nice turnover, the IRS comes knocking on your door, and they would like that you pay some taxes, and there's some social security, and there's some other things which sort of happens, right? So whether an enterprise is a DAO, or whether an enterprise is a set of people coming together, it doesn't really matter. But what we saw is that there was a huge move towards enterprise adoption on private, permissioned blockchains. And that's now completely falling apart. Because look and behold, there was no value proposition, right? It's just too expensive to do these private blockchains among your own server farms and all of that. So we're now seeing a lot of large companies who's been part of Hyperledger and it's been part of R3 Corda and been part of all that world. And they're looking at it and saying, you know what? Being on a first generation blockchain or second generation blockchain, which is private and permissioned, it doesn't give me any added value. I might as well stay in a centralized world. So they're actually now coming out and asking for, what can I do on a third generation blockchain? And more than that, we see that regulators are coming out with RFPs and saying, you know what, these private blockchains where we control everything, it doesn't give us a new financial market infrastructure as we hoped. What we need is interoperability. So in the European Union, for instance, there is 32 CSDs. So for those of you who are not as nerdy as I am, a CSD is a central security deposit. So basically, if you buy some shares, which hopefully not that many of you is doing, because that is a bit foolish, if you want to move that to another bank, right, they might be using another central security deposit or another way of doing that. And that means that you are locked into legacy systems where people are taking a nice paycheck for adding zero value. So these institutions and these large players are now going out and saying, you know what we need is operational resilience. We need stability, and we need systems where nation states who don't trust each other, they can trust each other through technology. Isn't that a nice shift? Yeah. So we have this fantastic opportunity suddenly that we can actually do more than just focus on our little pond. Do more than focusing on what we can do in the Cardano ecosystem, and we can start being a little bit more aggressive. And what I mean about that is that we can go beyond the scope of looking for adoption on Cardano and start looking at interoperability and start looking at how do we do a larger play among nation states and other things, because the technology is sound and solid and it holds. Now, utility tokens in a volatile market is a problem. Out of many reasons. So some of you probably know I've been doing quite a lot of work with regulators, and we just did a beta Explorer, and that beta Explorer is made for regulators. So don't worry, we're not trying to compete against your projects out there. But what we're really trying to do is two things. We're trying to launch a set of Java libraries, which makes it easier to build on Cardano. But more importantly, we needed a tool to prove to the regulators that when we say non-liquid, or when we say liquid staking or non-custodial liquid staking, what does that really mean? And can we prove it? Because the regulators don't really have the time to hire, an army of computer engineers and go through the Haskell code. I mean, we know how hard it is to find Haskell people, right? So what we needed is an actual tool to do that, because that basically opens up a conversation we could not have before, where we have a persona group, which is regulators, which is policymakers, which is auditors, all those sort of boring people. And when we sort of entered crypto, we said we're going to build a new society. We're going to break away from all of those, and they're just getting closer and closer. So the Cardano Foundation is playing hardcore, not just defense, but now also offense, towards ensuring that the long tail of innovation can happen on Cardano, and that you don't need to go through a regulated bank just because you have a really cool art project or you have a supply chain project. So this regulatory clarity is amazing. It's amazing that we are having these opportunities, but it does give us some challenges, and some of those challenges is really regarding governance. And I think the process around CIP 1694 has been really, really good. Nobody has solved governance yet. But the ability we have to put that into a CIPS process and being able to clearly define and describe how is the future governance process and combine that with a voting tally is exactly not just what a regulator is asking for, but it's actually also what the large companies are asking for. Because remember what we're actually doing and what you're doing. So when you are scaling your business to become 100 people, and thousands of clients are coming in and doing whatever you're doing on Cardano, right? You start asking yourself, how do I know that the features which I need for my product is also being supported in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years? Because you're now suddenly paying salary to 100 people. You're having responsibilities for a DAO or a set of products which, thousands, if not even millions of people are using every single day. So that ability we now have for a descriptive process and the ability to say to people, you have a voice. You can sit at the table, you can join Intersect, you can be a part of this, you can contribute to Cardano, sets us completely apart from most other projects. This is actually a lightning move, coming back to my guy standing on the rocket. But this is going to take a bit of time. So unfortunately, you will see that this is going to sieve through the procurement processes. I have to go a lot of education through that. We need to also live with this on a daily basis. And as Charles said, it can be really hard, to sit there in your underwear at 2 o'clock at night and figure out, is it 30 or 35%, right? It comes with responsibilities. But that we are able to clearly describe that now gives us a huge opportunity. And that opportunity, somebody needs to grab. And hopefully, that's some of you in this room today. So when I say that, enterprise blockchain is dead, long-lived blockchain for enterprises, is because we are actually seeing that they're waking up now and they can see that we have a huge play to happen. Now, I've introduced this slide a few times, and I think, I keep coming back to it because it's really important. There is 4 operating models on Cardano. And Cardano is unique because it has a different monetary policy than many other blockchains, which is amazing. We are not a central bank. We don't sit and print money in a lab in Zurich or in Wyoming, right? We actually have a finite amount of resources out there, which makes it really good and really unique. That's probably also why a lot of us like Bitcoin. But what it means is that you have to start thinking about when you run out of the reserves, are we then in a place where all incentives are self-sufficient? The best way I can explain it is that in Switzerland we have these parties. When you go to this party, you bring your own food. And what you tend to do is you really care for this food and you bring a little bit more than what you can eat yourself. Now what happens at the end of the party is you get a goodie bag and you get some food back home because there is always too much food. The reverse situation is you go to a party and there's, the guy who has the party here is making T-bone steaks and nice red wine. And you will eat all of that T-bone steak and drink all of that wine, and you probably eat more than you like, and there is no more food in the end. Now, a good blockchain ecosystem, you have to leave more on the table than what you take. And what we have to be really much aware of is that we do have set money aside, or ADA aside, to ensure the bootstrapping and the incentive mechanisms of Cardano for the next many, many years. But we need to be wary of, do we have sufficient diversity in transactions? Do we have sufficient transaction volume on top of Cardano to start thinking about this as a party where you leave more than what you take?
Help Rare Evo showcase a variety of stake pool operators and their missions around the world. Vote for Rare Evo Catalyst Proposal number 106811. Facilitating SPO travel and media production at high-value blockchain events worldwide.
Now, this is not a scary scenario because we are in a fantastic good place, but the Cardano Foundation's role is to think about 10, 20, 30 years. And one of the roles which I think is extremely important here is when you think about the adoption. And what we have today is that we call this the pond, by the way. So what I'm trying to explain here is that on the one side, up on the green side, what we have is everything who needs a blockchain to survive. So that's more or less all of you, and sorry if I didn't get your logo in there, just send me an email, I'll put your logo in there. It cannot be all logos, right? So we just picked up some projects and put it in there. But what it really does is it sort of illustrates that we might have, 100, 500 projects who's building and launching on Cardano. But if you compare that with Ethereum, for instance, or if you compare that to the App Store on Apple, right, that's not so significant yet. Now, if you go to the outer side, right, this is all companies who accept multi-party computation, DLT, and blockchain. What you start getting into is a situation that we see that Mercedes has a live application on a blockchain. Right? We start seeing, nation states having live applications on blockchain. We start seeing sort of a trend going in that direction. And I think what we need to do is, when we're also doing all this governance work, is we need to start inviting some of those companies who's not building on Cardano today to start joining Intersect, to start understanding what is the features and the value add we have here. Because we need to grow beyond that. We need to get out into a situation where we don't directly compete with other public permissionless blockchains, but there's a lot of food on the table, as I said before, from the private blockchains. On the left side is basically people who just, well, sorry to say so, they just eat your food. They're necessary on your system because we need to have them there to tick boxes and compliance and other things, but they don't actually do any transactions, right? So basically what they do, they have the ability for the first time ever to capture value from the blockchain or the database, do that in a presentation layer, and sell that as a product to other businesses. And this is great, and we need more of that as well. But when you start thinking about that, if they don't do any transactions, how can they contribute to Cardano as well? And there, for the first time, we now have opportunities, right? With Intersect, and we have opportunities for them also to contribute to the code base and so on. If you look into the lower right corner, you see is a little bit empty there. So this is what we think about as legacy businesses who is adopting Cardano. And there's a few more in there, right? But I think, specifically UNHCR is here today and so forth. And what is so special about some of those businesses is that they're not moving their whole business, the whole downstream architecture landscape to Cardano. They're piggybacking on certain things and start finding out, we can optimize something, we can lower cost here, we can do something which is better for our clients, and actually we can open up a new ecosystem where we can collaborate with people across sizes, across nations, across countries, by using something as beautiful as a blockchain. And then obviously under radical innovation, I put in Bitcoin, I put in NFTs, but there's room there. And I think what we're going to see as this matures and more people are building, we're going to start filling out those boxes. But what it really means is that the chart I showed you before, it needs to be in reverse. A lot of us has been working in the basements, and we've been talking about, how do we do a better address tier stack? How do we do, better connectivity layers? How do we do the networking stack better? It's a lot about the actual blockchain. And that's not the point anymore. That is also the point, but not the critical point. The critical point is, how do we get that green box to be as ridiculously big as possible to show people the value they can capture on Cardano? Because only by getting that box as big as possible, we get into a situation where people, they don't contribute to Cardano because they like Cardano. They contribute to Cardano because they actually rely on Cardano as a part of their product offering, as a part of their operating model, as a part of the families, the communities they serve in whatever business they do. So that means that we are starting to get contribution from these people, like we get from you today, and thank you very much for that. We're getting contribution from you today, which is awesome, but we need to start getting code contribution, brain contribution, resource contribution from a lot bigger pond than what we do today. What that also will do is, even though we use things like Hydra and Mithril and so forth, it will create bigger diversity in transactions. It will create more transactions on Cardano. And even though the transaction fee most likely will go down over time, what it will do is it will ensure that the reserves, which is basically made for bootstrapping Cardano to be self-sufficient, will either last longer or you can start actually deploying them faster. So when you sit at 2 o'clock at night in your underwear and start thinking about is it 30 or 35%, you can say, well, of course it's 35%, because we actually have the room for that. That is what it means to actually grow that. For those of you who's very sharp-eyed, you also see that the Cardano Foundation logo gets a lot smaller. And that is because the Cardano Foundation was never meant to stay there forever. The Cardano Foundation is there for a finite amount of time and for a finite amount of role until the ecosystem is able to take over some of the roles we are doing there today. And I think that's okay. You know, if the Cardano Foundation stays for a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, well, none of us is complaining. What this is all about is getting the right kind of adoption, ensuring that we lower the cost of operating and building on Cardano, and ensuring that we can solve real-world problems out there, who basically ensures that this value capture layer gets as big as possible. There's still a significant difference between an Ethereum blockchain and a Cardano in terms of how many builders and how many people who's deploying on it. But that difference is dwindling every single day. And I think that's due to you, and it's due to the great work from Imurgo and IOG, so thank you very much. Now, just to give you a little bit room for thought, right? Because you're like, oh, but I don't know. I mean, I'm a software engineer. I do really nice NFTs, or I do, awesome, supply chain and stuff like that. So this is a picture I actually, use for a lot of people, right? And extrapolation is really nice, right? So when you think about that, right, Cardano in the metadata as the current state as it is today actually can do 16,000 bytes. So for those of you who know, before I joined Cardano, I spent some years in PwC building up business model and technology, right? And everybody was shouting, data is the new oil. Data is what drives businesses. Data is everything, right? And now we see large language models and so on. So think about, Ethereum as we put up here now in terms of their metadata capacity. Think about their market cap, right? Think about their opportunity landscape in the pond I just showed before, right? And then think about if it really is true that data is what drives businesses and what drives value, which most likely it is. And then look and behold what Cardano can offer. I mean, this is mind-blowing, right? But it does require that we start thinking about the operating model and the problems we need to solve. Because it's not all problems whose low-hanging fruits on the blockchain. So we do spend a bit of time in the Cardano Foundation, as you probably know. We built a blockchain monitoring tool, which allows us to work with stake pool operators and get several different eyes looking at Cardano. We also do spend some time at actually looking at, how operational resilience is a network stack. And as you heard Charles say before, this is unprecedented in the world of blockchain outside Bitcoin to be so resilient, right? So I think this is going really well. But we do see sometimes that there is situations, like this is a picture actually taken from from a situation we had on the internet, where for those of you who's into engineering, you know this really well, right? That most of the public internet was really maintained by one single guy living here in the US, working, he was not even working, he was not even getting money from the Apache Foundation, right? He's just like a hardcore developer, and he's just built this little repo, and it turns out that little repo is what the whole internet is based on. Now, there's a larger discussion about decentralization versus centralization, and sometimes it's actually really good to have some centralization as you're growing, right? But I think what I'm trying to say with this picture is that one of the things which will allow us to grow better is to have more people with eyes on the code, more people with eyes on the infrastructure. And that's why I really believe that the stake pool operators, they're going to wake up one morning in a year's time or 2 years' time and think, well, hold on a second, what I did today at Rare Evo and my business model today, that is significantly different now 1 year or 2 years aside. Because as we're getting all of this adoption, we will get more requirements. We will get, new companies who want to contribute to the Haskell base, right? And the node will grow exponentially, right? And who's going to sit and actually evaluate if those new features is going to break it or make it? And everything gets a little bit more complicated. And that's why it's so powerful that we have so many SPOs who's already today joining the operator calls, already today is asking the tricky questions. Is there somewhere along this journey that we are standing on one foot and everything is relying on one little repo or one little feature? Because what that does, it makes us much more operational resilient. And this is quite boring, right? It's like the air we breathe. And with the air we breathe, we only really pay attention to it when we can't breathe anymore, right? So if you do a little experiment and you put your hand over your mouth and, you close your nostrils, try and see if you can, last for about 60 seconds. Suddenly, air becomes a high priority for you. And the more people, the more businesses, the more social systems we can change, who comes on board of Cardano, the more important it is for us to have a focus on some of those infrastructure components, because what's so unique about Cardano is it's ever changing, right? We are going to adapt as the world moves along. As the world moves along and realizes that blockchain is the place to be, as large language models and AI is going to challenge what we think is reality and what we can justify as true, we're going to see a boom in blockchain. But if we have some of those episodes, that's where we need stake pool operators and others to really start challenging that and pay attention to that, because Cardano has grown tremendously. So this is a slide we actually did where we're pitching a regulator around what you could do. And I think this, what it really does, it just shows you some of the cool things. So what I would like to say to you is that, tomorrow there's a Hydra presentation and tomorrow there's an Icon presentation as well. I really encourage you to go to the Hydra and to the Icon presentation. What we've done in the Cardano Foundation is we worked really, really hard to contribute to Hydra, which basically meant that we sort of tried to take down Hydra a few times. We tried different use cases. We're building the Cardano ballot and other things. And what we're seeing is that the contributions to Hydra is just, it's just going so fast. But it also means that there's complete new business cases and opportunities you can do with Hydra, which was not, previously available. And the same goes with Icon. So what I wanted to say with this slide is that you suddenly have the best of two worlds. You can anchor trust into the Cardano blockchain, but you can actually do a semi-permissioned environment where, the people who's not completely ready to hand over the rails yet, they can actually still do meaningful contribution on Cardano, and they can start benefiting from Cardano. Now, changing the ropes and incentives of participants is one of the things which I think specifically around, the SIPs discussions, which is very important. And here I just have a big ask, and that is, let's not do everything too fast, okay? If things looks really good on paper, you workshopped it out, everything is awesome, you vote on SIP 1694, it gets ratified, let's do things in incremental steps. Because I think when Satoshi, he wrote his white paper, he was very clever, right? He basically stepped out of it. And what you had is you had a tug of war between three entities. And it's not all entities, right? One is the core developers, the other one is the miners, and the third is actually the market cap. And that basically means that, Bitcoin is in a tug of war where it's very, very hard to move. Now, Ethereum just proved to the whole world that it's extremely centralized, right? There was a set of people, very, very few people, who basically just pulled, everything on a proof of stake blockchain and put that through. And I think that's amazing because it shows that Cardano really chose the right architecture choices. So thank you to IAG and the researchers for, already seeing that, 5-10 years ago. Yeah, give them a hand, huh? But think about this for a second, right? When you decide everything on Cardano as a part of a ballot or as a part of Intersect and those things, what we also do is we slow down some things, and we do require that people not only participate in the creation of the government, but they also participate on a daily basis. And I think that's what's so important about the DREPs and liquid democracy. And there is a trade-off here, right? When you have a dictator or you have a one-person shop, you can move very fast. But very often you get it wrong because it's the one person or a small team who basically decides the product to market fit. The more people who comes in and can give this feedback, the better it gets. But if they're not having the hand on the stove, if they're not basically hurting if the decision is wrong, well, then you have a problem, because then you have professional politicians who don't have any accountability. We want to create an ecosystem where there is accountability in there, but we also want to create an ecosystem who's going to change social systems of the world, and that's going to be really tough. So incremental movement and really enjoying this process of SIP 1694 and the Constitution is important. So when you are looking at some of this and participating in these workshops, I highly encourage you to think, what can I do to test out the hypothesis who looks so good on paper? It's a bit like what we did with the experiment with the stake pool operators vote. We used the crypto primitives and the amazing blockchain. We did a short update of the CLI. Yes, there were some people who were not super happy about it, but suddenly there was a new discussion about user experience. There was a discussion about how do you actually frame the wording of the problem? Is it really the right parameters we're doing? And now things get very complicated because now it's not code anymore, it's people. And people are not that simple. And Cardano represents already millions of people. So my ask here really is, if you have the opportunity to make some of these things concrete, which we are debating at the moment, let's do it. Let's test that. Let's verify that. Let's go on the Sanchez net. Let's try and take that down. Let's try and do something with these DREPs. Let's do as much as we can to test some of those things as early as possible, because what we then get out of it is we get innovation and we figure out a better and a more correct way to do it. Things on paper is not always what works in reality when humans are involved. Now, there's a lot of talk about sort of the general blockchain space and what's happening. So just I want to use the last sort of 3-4 minutes just to talk about what the foundation is doing, because this is a question I get a lot, specifically or in the US, where time zones are often a bit different. And we're basically, we're executing on 3 things this year. And it's basically education, it's adoption, and that's broken down into 6 areas. And those 6 areas is really Cardano mainnet support, operations and monitoring, which is the operation resilience I talked to you about before. Before, it was really only IOG and a few stake pool operators who cared about that. And that's okay, it's the best people in the world. But what you need is, as this thing grows, you need multiple entities doing that. So what we've done is we built up a team of site reliability engineers who has the ability to do this. We launched different relay nodes so we can capture data, right? We are trying to stay true to the cause of Cardano, saying that anonymity for a stake pool operator is paramount. And if we deploy a little piece of code to your stake pool, it's an attack vector, right? So we don't want to do that either, right? But we are now having, multiple entities and not just one entity thinking about network resilience and monitoring. And where we want to end is that stake pool operators have their own sets of tools, and they actually, have the education and they have the willingness to really not just operate Cardano, but also monitor Cardano and do, bug findings and disaster recovery as we move along. Then Voltaire, as you know, we've been part of the whole Voltaire discussion. I don't want to say too much about that, right? But I think what's really important for us is really to represent a part of the community, but also represent what we think is true. And that's why we try to vote, if we can, on all things. We try to ensure that the workshops are there, they're being held. We are gathering your voice, and we just wrote a report, which you can go in on the forum, the Cardano forum, and look, and where we basically congregated about 6 to 9 months of work speaking to the community over different Discord channels, and we try to write a summary about, what is the general sort of trend and tendencies towards CIP 1694. So I highly encourage you to go in and read that and maybe leave your comments in there and see if we got all of it right, or if we're missing something, just let's add it in there. On education, as I said before, education is not just about, what is the 3rd generation blockchain. We're coming at education from a different angle. We noticed that many universities, they're teaching their students about Bitcoin and Ethereum, but you can do so much more on Cardano. So we were looking at a way where we could actually provide the slides for multiple universities, but also provide the content for all of you. So you get all of those scripts and you do with it whatever you want. We even given that away to other blockchains. So other blockchains can use our educational material with their own logo on. Because in the end, if they're a 3rd generation blockchain, the more people who know what you could do on a 3rd generation blockchain, the better it is for adoption. And then it's our duty, if I may say so, to show them why Cardano is superior, or to do a bridge, or have some interoperability, have them as a layer 2. The options are many, right? Technical enablers, we probably saw a beta version coming out of the Explorer. We are looking at really, before the summit or just after the summit, launching a set of Java libraries, which makes it easier for you to build around that. And the Explorer is really meant as a regulatory play. Growth enablers, hopefully all of you will be at the summit, but we're doing some things around that. And then, as you saw, open source is very important for us. So we took over the address tier team to ensure that IOG really can focus on the blockchain. And we're trying to give that some love, put that into a more open source ecosystem with the banks and the exchanges. Plus, we're obviously bootstrapping ICANN and doing some other things. So this is the 6 things we're really trying to make ourselves accountable for. And when we end the year, this year, we're going to be quite hard on ourselves, and we're going to do another annual activity report, as you saw last year. And we're going to be as honest as we possibly can. Did we reach the target? Did we go the full way? And did it actually move the needle? Did it make the boat go faster on Cardano? Because I think in the end, what we really need is to accept that blockchain is open for business, and Cardano is potentially, if not the best one to actually do it with. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm enjoying talking to all of you.